I'm Mark Sanders.
I'm Mark Sanders, M-A-R-K-S-A-N-D-E-R-S, and I'm president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters, OAPFF.
Everybody ready? I'd like to thank you for attending today. I know today is going to be a very busy and interesting day over at the State House, something that we haven't seen before. There's a demonstration that's starting at 11. It seems to be kind of an ad hoc demonstration. Prior to that, there'll be a group of people walking from the local fire union hall, police and firefighters walking together from the fire hall to the State House. And then obviously hearing at 4 o'clock today for the Senate Insurance, Commerce, and Labor Committee. As I said earlier, my name is Jay McDonald, and I'm president of the Fraternal Order of Police of Ohio, representing over 26,000 active and retired officers. And I'm here today as part of a coalition of public safety unions from across Ohio that represents upwards of 40,000 active police officers and firefighters. Joining me today from the coalition is Jim Astorino, president of the Northern Ohio Firefighters, Steve Loomis, president of the Cleveland Police Patrolmen's Association, Larry Phillips, president of the Ohio State Troopers Association, Terry Gallagher, president of the Ohio Police Benevolent Association, and my friend Mark Sanders, president of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters. The reason we're here today is because Senate Bill 5 has captured the attention of the entire state. It is a piece of legislation that will affect 500,000 working Ohioans in this state today. Today they're going to have their 4th hearing on Senate Bill 5. Senate Bill 5 is collective bargaining reform that drastically affects workplace protections for public safety workers and others. Senate Bill 5 replaces a collective bargaining law that has been in effect for almost 30 years. It took almost 5 years to get passed and has calmed the labor tensions in this state. And this bill is being rushed through the legislature. The sponsor of the bill, Shannon Jones, told me that it took her a year to write this bill. As I said earlier, the bill's been in effect almost 30 years. And we're hearing rumors that they're going to vote this bill out this week after 4 hearings. And speaking on behalf of my almost 40,000 members of this coalition, we ask, what's the rush? If this is a good piece of legislation, if this is a good piece of legislation for the citizens of Ohio, then it should be able to stand up to the light of day. It's 475 pages long. No one got a copy of this bill before its introduction. A bill this complex, dealing with such a complex issue of Ohio law, deserves to have inspection. It deserves to have interested parties getting together, discussing what's in the bill, what's the intent of the bill, and if there are problems with the bill, on how best to fix those problems. This coalition of public safety officers, those who go to work each day to protect every citizen in Ohio, are asking, what's the rush? What's the downside of slowing down? What's the downside of giving this legislation the attention it deserves? Allowing members and citizens of the state to not have a voice at the Senate hearing where this bill is being heard is inappropriate in our belief, and we're asking the Senate to slow this bill down. Mark.
Good morning, and thank you to our coalition partners and our members here in uniform this morning. My name is Mark Sanders. I'm with the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters, and you heard my brother and colleague, President McDonald, talk about what's the rush? And I think every one of our citizens and our press assembled here today ought to be asking that same question. Certainly you've all been around Columbus enough to know that these bills take their time. They're very, in the Senate especially, a very deliberative body. This bill is being rushed through. That's a problem. As you hear, it's a long, complex bill. There are several unintended potential consequences legally that are associated with this bill that, quite frankly, our attorneys have looked at and through inspection have more questions than have been answered in the hearings of 2 or 3 times. Again, it amends a complicated piece of law that's kept labor peace in Ohio. My testimony, I described some of the trials and tribulations public safety officers and public employees across this state faced in the late 80s and why we are here today. Certainly our message is for labor management relations, unlike the days of the late 70s running up to the bill when our members were in the streets fighting for their rights. Because when you have inequity, people will rise, especially in our line of work, when we can't negotiate for safety provisions such as training, staffing, deployment, equipment, our members become very concerned. And that's why we're here today. That's why our message is to the Senate, what is the rush? It also breaks a covenant that's been held, especially between the public safety officers and the citizens of Ohio and the legislature, a covenant that has allowed us to maintain our uninterrupted service delivery to our citizens for nearly 30 years. We want to maintain that. We certainly do not want to get back to the days where our issues are on the street. They talk about transparency. Again, a Cincinnati council member testified last week. He's an employee of the Bengals. He didn't want to say that. He talked about being just worked for a business in Cincinnati. I'll negotiate our contract in the middle of Bengal Stadium. Might not get a big crowd. Maybe more than the Bengals. But it's not about transparency. It's about doing professional business with professional safety workers in Ohio. And again, we want to bring to the table labor management cooperation. We'd like to bring those principles to the table in the Senate and have interested parties, police, fire, teachers, other public safety workers, bring those interested parties to the table and let's talk about refining this bill, as some of the senators have talked about, rather than pulling the guts out of it. So that's my statement today. Our members are certainly interested in working with the Senate, and we'll be glad to answer any questions.
They say when you ask a question, you should always know the answer. What is the rush, in your opinion?
Well, we don't quite frankly know. There has not been a sufficient answer given to this coalition about why the rush is. We've heard speculation about referendum. To us, there's a lot of ground to cover before we get to there. Right now, what we're asking for is what we've done in other pieces of legislation. Those of you who are in the State House on a regular basis know about Senate Bill 77. Senate Bill 77 last session was a complicated piece of legislation that dealt with DNA collection and was pushed by the Innocence Project. Well, that piece of, that's the kind of model we'd like to follow with Senate Bill 5. Senate Bill 77, we all got to the table. We all got to talk about what parts of that bill were good for our members and what parts of that bill were contrary to our members' mission. And we were able to produce a piece of legislation that we were all proud to be a part of. That kind of interaction, that kind of participation, that kind of negotiation hasn't happened with Senate Bill 5. So the answer is we don't know what the rush is.
Jay, you said last week during your testimony that you were willing to compromise on some issues like transparency. And where do you stand in terms of your talks with Shannon Jones on that?
Well, we continue to stand to be ready and willing to work to make this a better bill.
Has there been contact?
We've had contact with multiple people in the Senate. We've had contact with multiple people on the committee as well. We have put forth our positions on several topics of the bill. As my friend said, this bill is very, very complicated, and each piece directly affects other pieces of the bill. So it's hard for me to come and say, well, I agree to Part A, not knowing how that affects Part B, because the bill is so long and complicated that I don't know those answers yet. That's part of the reason we're asking to slow down, is to make sure we don't have unintended consequences that arise out of this bill. Some of our lawyers have referred to this bill as the Labor Attorney Employment Relations Act, because it's going to require lots and lots of litigation to determine what this bill, what impact it has on other parts of the law, and to try to clarify provisions of this law that are that we don't quite frankly know what they mean.
Can you give us an example of an unintended consequence?
Well, right now there's parts of this bill that deal with the timeline. Defines impasse as after 90 days of good faith negotiation, declares impasse. But it doesn't define what good faith negotiations are. It doesn't define when the timeline starts. That's an issue that will, left unattended, will end up in court for somebody to decide.
And I think we've even found in the seniority issue with regard to layoffs, there's also in the bill that certainly conflict with civil service law and current collective bargaining law in 4117. So there are several answers that we have questions to before we can even provide answers.
Well, the governor has said for some time that he doesn't like or binding arbitration as it is now. How important are the provisions on binding arbitration in this bill to your objections to it? And have you met with the governor or any of his people to discuss what he said, to try to provide some input to him?
We have met with, we've had discussions with people from the governor's staff. Binding arbitration, conciliation, is an extremely important facet of Senate Bill 5 to my members. As you know, our members are not permitted by law to strike, and that's for good reason. Interruption of public service, of public safety services, is unacceptable, and that is why they treated us different in the law to begin with. That is why public safety officers were given the right for arbitration in the law to begin with. And Ohio law has recognized that fact for 30 years. Quite frankly, there's no compelling evidence or reason to change the way binding arbitration is applied today.
In what you just said, since you can't strike, you were given the right to go to binding arbitration. Aren't you basically conceding there? That is a provision that often helps your side, not management's side.
Well, I don't know that fact to be true. I think a dispatch analysis has proven that binding arbitration, A, is rare, and B, is ending. It frequently ends with a equitable split of employee wins and employer wins, if there is such a thing. I will tell you that when I sit down and negotiate a contract, I believe that the mere fact that you're going that far is extremely, it proves that nobody has won in the negotiation. That binding arbitration is dangerous, not just for management, it's dangerous for our people too. That's why 98% of all contracts are settled before binding arbitration, because we realize that binding arbitration is an unknown quantity, and we'd much rather have a seat at the table and our members have a say in the outcome of the final product.
Just to follow up on Phil's question with the governor, based on his comments that we learned about last week, his apology for those, and the fact that he seems to be single-handedly spearheading this change, how would you describe your relationship with the governor? You just tweeted out that he's not going to back down to you or any of the unions. I mean, how would you describe that relationship? I mean, is it your view that this is coming from the top?
Well, right now we're dealing with what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is Senate Bill 5. And what I can tell you is that the majority of Ohioans support law enforcement. The majority of Ohioans support our position on this issue, as published in the Quinnipiac poll, that by a 17-point margin, the majority of Ohioans support collective bargaining rights for public employees, and even I would be willing to bet even more so for police and fire. So that's that's an issue for down the road. Right now, the issue in front of us is Senate Bill 5.
If this bill should pass, will it end up on the ballot as a referendum?
Well, I would say that certainly our members and our coalition would take every option available to them to ensure that we protect our rights at the bargaining table. We protect our ability to serve the public with regard to public safety and our safety. So, you know, we're leaving all options open at this point, but we certainly want to work with the Senate and where the piece of legislation is at now, and you know, hopefully in good faith. And we're committed to working in good faith. But it seems to us that this is being rushed through, and again, what's the rush?
During the year that Senator Jones was working on the bill, did any of your organizations have a role in that process?
No.
Yeah, no.
How easy do you think it would be for labor to collect the 200,000 or so petition signatures to block this bill temporarily and then to have it up for a vote by the people?
Bill, that's a hard question. It's one that we've not given any thought to. What we've given thought to is, let's slow this bill down. Let's give police officers, deputy sheriffs, highway patrol troopers, law enforcement officers who work for the state of Ohio, and firefighters in every corner of the state the ability to sit down and, in a sense, collectively bargain the collective bargaining law. We have been very successful over the last 30 years of sitting down and coming and reaching outcomes that are beneficial to our members and to our employers and to the communities that we serve. Police officers and firefighters across this state have negotiated millions of dollars worth of concessions. We understand the economic climate. We understand the crisis facing not only the state but the nation as well. And we have proven time and time again that we are willing to work with others to help alleviate that pressure from collective bargaining agreements. And we'd like the same opportunity to sit down and have a say at the table in regards to this bill.
Is the threat of a referendum a bargaining tool that you're using right now as you talk to legislators? Are you telling them, look, if you will soften this bill and do A, B, and C, we promise not to try for a referendum, we'll be satisfied? Is that one of your bargaining tools right now?
No.
No.
We're not talking about referendum. We're not talking about budget. We're not talking about other things that have been mentioned as potential avenues for this bill. What we are talking about is, let's slow down. What's the harm in slowing down? Why can't we get to the table and have interested party meetings on this bill, as have been the practice with other complicated bills? The speed at which this bill is moving is quite frankly unheard of. The fact that we're having hearings till 9 o'clock at night with people in the atrium who can't get into the hearing room on a bill that's almost 500 pages long, that affects almost 500,000 people. Why are we trying to push so hard? Let's slow down and give everybody the right to be heard on this bill.
There's similar legislation moving in Wisconsin, but one of the differences is it exempts police and fire from the changes in the collective bargaining law there. Has there been any discussions here with the senators about trying to follow that model in Ohio, or even bringing that to the table?
Well, certainly those discussions could have been taken up if they would have came to us, as the question asked earlier, if we had any input on the bill. There was never any deference to public safety. They threw us in the bill altogether, and we have not had any specific discussions with regard to that issue here in Ohio.
The flexibility to be able to manage their costs and deal with a cut that they're seeing from the state level. Can you just respond to that sort of basic premise behind why we need to do this?
Absolutely, and I have that a two-part answer for that. One is that they're broke in places that don't have collective bargaining as well. In states that don't have collective bargaining, they face the same economic pressures that we're facing here in Ohio. States that have collective bargaining, states that don't have collective bargaining are all in the same position, so I don't see how eliminating collective bargaining helps relieve budget pressure, because it exists in places that don't have it. The second thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, we have consistently, in cities and counties and villages and townships across this state, worked with our employers to help them with the economic condition. And we've done that at the union negotiating table. We've sat down and negotiated givebacks, concessions, to help our employers through this economic time. It's happened in big cities, it's happened in small cities. It's happened at the state level, and it's happened at the smallest village. And we've been consistently successful in helping our employers accomplish those goals.